is going on with Keir Starmer, Jonathan? Why is he now giving back?
What is going on? He's busy being our Prime Minister, putting the people's priorities first as Prime Minister. That's what he's doing.
In relation to these gifts, these freebies, why is he now giving back £6,000 and why those specific things? What's the principle here? Is it a mission of doing something wrong? Is it a panic that it appears he's done something wrong? What's going on?
Well, what I think has happened is that they've decided that all the gifts he's had since he became Prime Minister, for tickets for the Taylor Swift pop concerts and things of that nature, he's decided to pay for them rather than accept them as donations. And he's also said we're going to look at the rules around what gifts should be declared and shouldn't be declared, because at the moment it's left to the judgment of the individual minister or member of Parliament as to whether they think it should be declared. And he thinks there needs to be a whole new set of rules around this with clear principles as to which ministers can apply.
So there isn't room for error and muddle that would leave you in an embarrassing situation like he's been in, let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the rules are very unclear at the moment about what you can declare and you shouldn't declare. When I was a Member of Parliament, I used to just think it's just best to just declare everything, but to err on the side of caution. But you don't have to do that necessarily. It's up to you as an individual.
But the confusing thing here is he said yesterday that there are new rules coming, but we don't know what they are yet. In the meantime, he said he's going to pay some stuff back, but he's not said on what rule that is based. It could be things he's received since the election, possibly, although I guess he's still wearing the suits he received before the election. But he's also saying that other cabinet ministers don't have to pay things back. And if there's a rule which is that you do have to pay things back since the election, surely it applies to everybody. So it just seems like a bit confusing.
Well, I mean, I don't want to irritate my former friends, still friends, former colleagues I meant in the cabinet, shadow cabinet. They're still my friends, obviously. But I suspect many of them will obviously now come under pressure to pay back where they've had free tickets for pop concerts and the like since the general election. But I think it's the right thing to do to try and work out and put in place clear sets of rules around this issue, because we've not had clear rules around donations to politicians and ministers. As ministers, there's a separate set of rules for MPs. This is why it's really confusing. If you're an MP, you do have to declare things. Sometimes as a minister, you don't have to publicly declare things. That doesn't make any sense. So tidying that up so everybody knows where people stand, I think, is the right thing to do.
So it was wrong for him to go to a Taylor Swift concert or to a football match since the election, and for that to be paid for by the football club?
No,
if he goes to the guest of Wembley for the FA Cup final, he's got to pay for his ticket.
Well, I think going to football is slightly different. Everyone knows he's a big, real Arsenal fan. He can't go and sit in his seat where he's got the season ticket. So that seems to me reasonable, that he therefore goes as a guest of the Arsenal in one of their boxes.
How's that different from Taylor Swift?
Well, because I just think it is, because he's a well-known, he's a genuine football fan. He's followed Arsenal all his life. He's got a seat.
So he's not a genuine Taylor Swift fan?
Well,
that's even more bizarre. Now, I think this is one of those where they're trying to sort of subcontract judgment. You know, if we can all follow rules, but you don't need rules for everything you do in your life. You elect somebody to be Prime Minister because he can decide, or she can decide, if you're a Conservative Party and you pick a woman every now and then, you decide where you exercise discretion, and he doesn't seem to think that there's room for discretion. He needs a subcontract to some retired judge, the sort of process of working out what is acceptable or not. But what he's done is the equivalent of breaking into your house, nicking your tellies, your videos, your sort of hi-fi or whatever you've got, your sort of Sonos speaker system, and then you bump into him in the pub and he says, "Tell you what, I'll give you your mobile phone back, but I'm keeping the rest of it." It's kind of mad, isn't it? It's a sort of acknowledgement that he's done wrong without acknowledging what the scale of it. 6,000 out of 100,000
Anushka, you've written a book, fascinating read, by the way, well done, take it as read, which has a subtitle, How Labour Won Big and the Tories Crashed the Party. Is Keir Starmer having won big, crashing things as soon as in office with something that he must be thinking, oh, God, I attacked the Tories so much on getting this wrong. How is it mucked up so badly for me?
I mean, it is sort of extraordinary, isn't it? And you know that, like, people are talking about it. I was on the side of a sports pitch this weekend watching my kids, all the parents were talking about it. They never normally talk about politics. And the problem is, and actually this is what I end with this thought, is the biggest problem in politics right now is that public trust is on the floor, absolutely on the floor, like it hasn't been for years and years and years. And I think they recognise this in Downing Street. They recognise that the biggest thing they need to do is get people to trust them. That's why they're being a bit more pessimistic than people might like, because they think we don't want to overpromise. But this looks like politicians on the take, and it is just coming up on the doorstep, it's coming up in their focus groups, and it just looks bizarre. Particularly, the bit that always gets me is the glasses, the amount he spent on glasses. Like, how expensive were those glasses? I mean, look, they've done it...
Glasses are expensive.
I think...
They're
not over £2,000.
But 14 pairs,
apparently.
Where you get... But but the thing...
Do you think Keir Starmer ever said to anybody, I need 14 pairs of glasses and £32,000 worth of clothes?
What they thought, in opposition, they thought, you need to look the part if you want to be Prime Minister. And what they probably should have done is the Labour Party should have had a clothing fund rather than personal donations to him. They've messed up. They're now trying to fix it by sort of saying, oh, well, ministers didn't have to do it, we had to do it. And Keir's really very honest, and that's why his numbers are so big, and he loves Arsenal. But in the end, it just doesn't look good. I think they'll get over it, but his trust issue...
Isn't it a classic rule, though,
is massive.
In politics, when you get into a mess like this, you have to stand back and say, OK, what can we now do which stabilises a position and means that from now on we do things in a particular way, and until then, you don't say anything. Because if you say things in dribs and drabs, it gets totally confusing and inconsistent, and it feels as though they are just making it up as they go along.
Yeah, but you guys have been inside Downing Street. What I would do, this is as a human being, is come out and be like, in an interview, with ITV ideally, you know what, I've messed up. I look back, it looks bad, I get that it looks bad, and I'm going to try and fix it now. But for some reason, politicians never, ever do that. And I presume that's because it doesn't go down well.
Is that because they're jumped upon? That's because they've just got into office? What is the reason why they don't do that? Because you're right, that's a human thing to do, say, oh, blimey, I've got this wrong. But they don't.
Well, just remember with this, it's just, I mean, on your very... creative metaphor a few moments earlier about stealing people's high-fives. Do people still have high-fives in their houses?
No. That's why I segue to Sonos.
But anyway, nicking high-fives, right, that is criminal and dishonest. This isn't criminal. This is not like in the expenses scandal, like 15 years ago, where there were MPs who went to prison because they stole from the taxpayer. Keir Starmer hasn't taken anything from the taxpayer. These have been donations by football clubs or organisations who have paid for tickets for concerts. Yes, it doesn't look good, but he's not had his hand in the till.
No, my point was about that we're meant to be grateful that he's repaying £6,000 out of £100,000. That's my point. Not that he's criminal, but that he thinks that the mitigation of this versus that is actually sufficient.
Sorry.
And how much did Boris Johnson repay of the wallpaper he received from the
I think he repaid it in full to a party donor, didn't he? And it's still hanging on the wall, presumably. He's not wandering around the world wearing it. And I don't know how much your glasses were, but I don't think he ever got... I don't know any man who's let another man pay for his clothes, his glasses, and certainly not dresses for his wife. It just doesn't feel right.
No, but it's the real problem for Keir Starmer is less that he's taken that stuff, although I think the fact his number's so high, and more that he really attacked Boris Johnson over the wallpaper and everything else. And actually, when we were, like, making news pieces on this, you can look back at Keir Starmer's record in opposition, and it doesn't look great. And people in Downing Street say to me, but why? They do it too. Why is it all on us? It's, well, you promised you wouldn't do it, and that's why it looks bad.
The issue, from memory, the Boris Johnson issue on the wallpaper and all of that, they were trying not to declare it and hide that and shush it up, and it was forced. Downing Street was forced to reveal the details. The reason we know all about this is because it's all been declared. It's all in the public domain. That's the only reason why we know about the glasses and the clothes and so on, because it's in something called the Register of Members' Interests,
well,
which is on the
website.
Well, they will get
past it. As you know, like, very serious news stories, people move on, but I do think it's affected trust.
So, Nushka, in your book, you talk about how you see Keir Starmer as a ruthless politician. Yeah. And citing the winter fuel payment, I think many people would look at that and think that's something that looks... I think the definition of ruthless is without care, isn't it? And I think that's how it comes across. And you also think he wouldn't have done so well against Boris Johnson.
Well, I don't think he's ruthless. I don't think the ruthlessness that I saw in Keir Starmer links to what he did with winter fuel payments. I actually think that was a political mistake in a way, even though I can totally see why they decided to do it. But he's politically completely ruthless. It's a weird one. You guys know him obviously better than me, because he's like everyone I spoke to who knows him personally says he's incredibly caring. And I saw it myself. He's so protective of his wife. He'll hate the fact that his wife, Vic, has been brought into these stories. One person actually started crying when they were telling me about how kind Keir Starmer was to them when a relative died. But politically, totally ruthless. I mean, this is a guy who supported Jeremy Corbyn, actually said to win the leadership that the 2017 Labour manifesto should be our foundational document. And then within a year and a half of being leader, sacked the General Secretary of the Labour Party within 20 minutes of becoming leader, kicked out Rebecca Long-Bailey, the most left-wing shadow cabinet person, obviously booted out Jeremy Corbyn, and then changed the rules of the Labour Party so no Corbynista could ever be elected again. Now, to some, maybe people around this table, that was strategic brilliance, and to other people, it was quite cynical. And what I saw it as was whatever else you see it as, it's politically really ruthless to get to the position that he wanted to get to.
And do you see that as different to many other politicians that become leaders? Because taking a position and seeing it through, isn't that what is required of
I think it probably is what is required, and it's why he became Prime Minister in a way. And in fact, somebody said about Rishi Sunak, they used language that I would never use, and certainly not on GMB, but they basically said that you've got to be a very bad word to be Prime Minister. You've got to be a bit of a bad guy in a way, and they thought Rishi Sunak wasn't able to do that. That you've got to basically be able to upset people, take really difficult decisions, and I definitely think Keir Starmer is capable of that. It's not... ruthless, the word, is really negative, but I don't actually think it's a negative thing about a leader, because ultimately, he would argue he had to do that to get where he is.
The problem on this expenses thing is, your example there was clear, decisive, strategic, sort it out, move on.
Which they did in the election campaign, and so I'm almost quite surprised they didn't shut this down more quickly since then. It hasn't felt very ruthless. It's felt a bit incompetent. And there's other things going on that people have said to me who are in the operation, we're quite surprised this wasn't cleared up quicker, because he is ruthless.
But you said your final sentence is, if Labour fails to repair and rebuild trust, then when it comes to 2029, they could well lose the election. They could well lose. Is Labour going to lose the next election because of expenses and these kind of things, or is there something bigger you're referring to?
The main thing I'm referring to there is he's got this massive majority, and in fact, Jonathan spoke to me about this idea that there are no safe seats left, and Jonathan is living, breathing proof of it, which is they've got a massive majority, which was strategically brilliant, because what they did was they ruthlessly targeted resources in the places they needed to win. But it is a very shallow majority. All the majorities in individual seats are much smaller than they were previously. I mean, you've talked about it here. We talked about it on election night. A third of votes for 2/3 of seats. And so what I'm saying is, people look at that and they think, we can take you on. I still think your money would be on Labour at the moment, but I've just come back from Birmingham Tory conference and they were cock-a-hoop. I mean, I don't know whether that's because they were deluded about the result or whether they see an opportunity. And I'll tell you what, I must have heard about 10 to 20 jokes about glasses from the stage.
We're here, Danny. Is Mishka right? Could Labour well lose?
Yeah, of course she's right. I mean, politics is volatile. So the day job I now do, which is a think tank called Labour Together, we did a bit of analysis a few weeks ago, and it showed that, yes, Labour won the election because people wanted change, and the Labour Party itself had changed. So that ruthlessness you referred to was about us changing as a party, because we had gone on quite a sort of wacky, some very extreme adventure for a few years. We had to change. But our analysis also shows that our victory is fragile and trust is low in politics, and politics is faster, if you like. People will shift their opinion, they will shift their vote much more readily than they would have done in the past. And as you say, and it's my personal pain, I'm the proof of that. I mean, I had what should have been on paper, rock-solid Labour seat. I was wiped out on a particular issue, very specific issue, But it does show you that politics can move very quickly.
And we all think that was a real shame, by the way, because one of the good guys. But you look at 2019, people were talking about the Conservatives being in power for a decade and more, that Boris Johnson would be drawing his pension before he was out. And then a global pandemic comes along and certain things happen and bam, it's all gone. And he got nearly 4 million more votes than Keir Starmer. That's the reality in terms of how shallow the victory is, in terms of winning hearts and minds, in terms of winning the argument. It's very, very thin, which is why these things that are ultimately trivial, I think we should just pay our prime ministers enough money. They don't have to care about, you know, how they get dressed and where they go and watch football and all that. But that's not a very popular view. But these things will stick as long as we keep going round in circles like that.
Well, there are candidates hoping to upset Labour's victory at the next election. You've been looking at the Tory party candidates at the moment. We've seen a lot of events, haven't we, over the Tory party conference, a lot of speeches yesterday. Who do you think is leading in your view, and who do you think will be left to the last two?
So I sat in that hall, I watched them all. I still think Robert Jenrick is, on paper, the favourite because he sort of positioned himself very much to the right, and the party members... I mean, a bit like for Keir Starmer, when you have to win over the party members, they don't necessarily agree with the voters that you then need to win.
But he didn't have a good day yesterday.
No, I mean, the two people who got the biggest cheer in the hall and the warmest reception were Kemi Badenoch, and there were a couple of members afterwards who were saying to me, we think there's going to be a stitch-up, we think the MPs are going to keep her off the ballot, we don't think that's fair. And James Cleverly, who unquestionably has made the most progress, because people did not think he was going to be a front-runner at all beforehand, but he gave a really impressive speech, and I actually messaged...
Rather a personal speech as well, wasn't it?
I messaged someone in Downing Street. I said, did you watch? Are you watching the Tories? And they weren't watching. I'm sure some of them are. And I thought you should be watching because actually... I thought that was quite an impressive speech. I mean, I think it's easy to watch that. I think it was a really good speech, which was aimed at voters, I would say, more than it was aimed at Tory members, and assume, therefore, James Cleverly suddenly goes neck and neck with Robert Jenrick. You've got to understand who is voting in this. And I think Robert Jenrick has positioned himself very cleverly for the membership. And if it was him versus Kemi Badenoch, I think it would be quite close, although she has obviously said some things at conference that have upset people. And the one that didn't really get as much coverage, maybe because of what was happening in the Middle East, was... I couldn't believe it when she said it. I had to keep re-watching it to check if she was joking. She said 5 to 10% of civil servants are very, very bad, should be in jail bad. But it didn't cause as much controversy as other comments.
The person with the Cleverly speech, of course, was James Cleverly. And it's not a surprise to me that he landed well, because he is a charming, normal guy, more experienced than most, great backstory. His mother came here from Sierra Leone as a midwife, and yet he doesn't sort of rub that in your face. It's
he
just
did mention
part of it. Well, of course he should mention it. It's relevant. And actually... through a weird sort of circle of things, I met one of the leaders of Sierra Leone who says they all love him out there. They still think of him as one of them.
So what's the chances of Tory members?
Well, do you know what? People forget that he was party chairman for ages, and he toured virtually every association. And I chaired one event at one association, and he landed like a dream, because he doesn't have to pretend to be something. He doesn't have to position himself. He doesn't have to come up with crazy policies for people to think. He looks like a decent guy.
He also said yesterday that he's the candidate that Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage and Ed Davey fear most.
Well... I mean, I just think it's bizarre that Robert Jenrick is the front-runner, because he's just a bit weird, frankly. I mean, I just don't get it. But anyway, look, James Cleverly's certainly the most personable. He's probably the most comfortable in a studio. I think he'd probably, if he ever gave up politics, he'd be very good on these types of panels, I suspect. But in the end, I think the issue for all the Tories is that they are really not prepared to take the deep-rooted changes that they need to do in order to win the trust of the British public. Just because there are some problems at the moment that the Labour Party, the Labour government are grappling with, does not mean automatically people are going to shift straight to the Tories. I mean, there is still red-hot anger out there about what the Tories did, this perception that there was more raves in Downing Street than Ibiza, that people are paying more on their mortgage because of economic mistakes they made. Until the Tories really face up to that, I'm not sure that they would win back the trust of voters, even though voters are prepared to shift their votes quite quickly. And I didn't see anything from the Tory conference really recognising the mistakes they made and how they would change themselves and reassure people they wouldn't make the same mistakes in the future.
Shall we speak about the situation in the Middle East, which is disturbing and has been so for weeks and months? Overnight, Israel seemed to suffer its first big setback against Hezbollah, with militants ambushing and killing a number of soldiers. Meanwhile, you know, the British Armed Forces are concerned and are on standby to help get British nationals out. And the Daily Express has this as a front page, which I think will bring it home in a way to lots of people who aren't directly affected, with family members in the region. Security chiefs fear rise in terror attacks in UK. October the 7th charging on at us. Terrible anniversary, one-year anniversary of that original assault, certainly in the minds of Jewish people. Should we fear it? What can be done to de-escalate? It feels like it's all going in one direction at the moment.
It's horrible. Next Monday will be the anniversary of that hideous terrorist attack on Israel, which triggered all this. And I think at the time, virtually the whole world was supportive of Israel doing whatever was needed to stop that happening again. But very, very quickly, the actions taken by Israel promoted a reaction from elsewhere. And none of these things are ever simple. When you say it's a limited operation, it never is. Every time you kill someone, you create a whole bunch of people who want to kill you and a whole bunch of people on your side. And invariably, you escalate. And so I understand how you can say strategically, yes, you need to go in and push people back beyond the river so their rockets can't get you. But every time you go in and you bomb somewhere and you invariably kill civilians, then you create another generation of people who will take that battle on.
Interestingly, though, in Israel now, compared to a few months ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu is now stronger. He's in charge. He's not about to be deposed. People will think he's succeeding. He has turned round, at least in the short term, what looked like a very precarious political situation for him. And that's what he'll care about. He's the Prime Minister. He needs to stay in charge.
Yeah, I mean, like, everyone's sitting back... everyone's watching this and... deeply, deeply worried. As you said, we're a few days away from the October 7th anniversary, an absolutely horrendous event, and there are still hostages who are, you know, that the world is urging to be released, and we hope those the remaining hostages can be released. We all want to see an end to the loss of life, the desperate loss of innocent life, both innocent Palestinian life. Now, there's obviously people going to be killed in Lebanon. We've seen soldiers getting killed as well. I mean, people want the Middle East to sort of step back from the brink. And actually, this is the issue which is going to become, I think, the big political issue, because whether we like it or not, we are impacted by this. It's going to impact the global economy. I don't know what the prices of oil is at the moment, but I noticed in the last 24 hours it did spike. All of these things, in the end, do impact us here because we're part of a global economy. And I think, you know, when Parliament returns next week, this is going to be the dominant issue.
Good to talk to all of you this morning. Thank you very much.
How Labour won big and the Tories crashed the party, taken as read. Anushka's book out now.